There is a number that quietly sits inside millions of people right now, a number most of them have never had explained to them properly. It is not a diagnosis. It is not yet a disease. But it is a warning that your body is already issuing. And in most doctor's appointments, it gets about 90 seconds of attention before the conversation moves on. If you have ever been told your blood sugar is a little high, or that you are borderline, or that you are in the pre-diabetes range, and you walked out of that appointment with more confusion than clarity, this is the conversation that should have happened instead. Because here is what almost nobody tells you. The standard advice, cut the sugar, move more, is true. But it is incomplete. It treats the surface of the problem while the real engine driving it keeps running underneath. Today, we are going to fix that gap. We are going to walk through exactly what is happening inside your body when blood sugar starts to drift upward. And then we are going to talk about 3 ordinary spices sitting in kitchens everywhere that published research has connected to real improvements in how your body manages glucose. One of them in particular has results that genuinely surprise the scientists studying it. Stay through to the end, because that one comes last, and it changes how you should think about something you probably already own. What is actually happening inside your body? Let's start at the level most people never get to see. Every time you eat, your digestive system breaks that food down into glucose, a simple sugar that becomes your body's primary fuel. That glucose moves into your bloodstream, and from there it needs to get inside your cells, because that is where it actually gets used for energy. This is where insulin comes in. Insulin is a hormone made by your pancreas, and you can think of it as a key. It travels through your blood, finds the doors on the surface of your cells, and unlocks them so glucose can move inside. When this system works the way it is designed to work, the whole process is almost invisible. You eat, glucose rises briefly, insulin opens the doors, glucose moves into the cells, your blood sugar settles back down, and you feel steady. But here's what begins happening, slowly, in the body of someone heading toward prediabetes. Those cellular doors start to resist the key. Insulin shows up, but the lock doesn't turn as easily as it used to. Your pancreas notices that glucose is still floating around in the blood longer than it should, so it does the only thing it knows how to do. It produces more insulin, trying to force those reluctant doors open. For a while, this actually works. Your blood sugar numbers can look almost normal because your pancreas is compensating by working much harder than it should have to. This hidden phase is called insulin resistance, and it is the real starting point of almost every prediabetes story. The problem is that a pancreas working in overdrive does not stay in overdrive forever. Over months, sometimes years, it begins to wear down. Insulin output starts to drop at the exact moment your cells need more of it, not less. That is the point where blood sugar numbers stop hiding the problem. A fasting glucose test comes back elevated. An A1C test, which reflects your average blood sugar over roughly 3 months, lands in the prediabetes range. And that is usually the first moment a person hears any of this out loud from a doctor. Here's the part that gets left out of that conversation almost every time. Insulin resistance is never just a blood sugar issue. It is a whole body issue, because insulin touches almost every system you have. Your liver, sensing the disrupted signaling, tends to start storing more fat than it should. Inflammation rises in tissues throughout your body. Your blood vessels experience slow, cumulative stress. You may notice a heaviness after meals because your cells are not pulling in fuel efficiently, even though there is plenty of glucose available. Cravings for sugar and refined carbohydrates often intensify, not because your body lacks fuel, but because the delivery system moving that fuel into your cells has become unreliable. Many people also notice weight settling around the midsection specifically, because visceral fat, the fat surrounding your organs, is closely tied to how your body handles insulin signaling. Sleep can become lighter and less restorative. Mental clarity can dim in ways that are easy to dismiss as just getting older. None of these are separate, unrelated complaints. They are downstream effects of the same root cause, the inflammation loop. Nobody explains. Now let's talk about the piece that genuinely changes how you should think about all of this. Chronic inflammation. When people hear the word inflammation, they usually picture something obvious: a swollen ankle, a red and tender cut. That is acute inflammation, and it is a healthy, necessary response that resolves once healing is done. Chronic low-grade inflammation is a completely different animal. It produces no swelling you can see and no pain you can point to. It operates quietly, at the cellular level, for years, and most people never know it is there. And here is why that matters so much for blood sugar specifically. Chronic inflammation is one of the primary drivers that makes those cellular locks, the insulin receptors, less responsive in the first place. When your cells are continuously exposed to low-level inflammatory signaling, the receptors that are supposed to respond to insulin become sluggish. So you end up with a loop. Inflammation worsens insulin resistance. Insulin resistance, through the metabolic stress it creates, worsens inflammation. Each one feeds the other, quietly, in the background for years. This is exactly why cutting sugar alone so often produces disappointing results. It is not that cutting sugar is wrong, it absolutely matters. But if the inflammatory environment underneath is left untouched, the body keeps struggling even when the diet on paper looks clean. This is the gap where the 3 spices we are about to walk through actually do their work. Not as a replacement for good nutrition, but as tools that address the inflammatory and cellular side of the equation that diet changes alone often miss. Before we get into them, I want you to do something quick. If you or someone you love has dealt with high blood sugar or a pre-diabetes diagnosis, drop a single word in the comments below. It genuinely helps this information reach someone else who needs to hear it today. Go ahead, I'll wait. Let me tell you about a woman I'll call Margaret, because her story is one that plays out, in some version, in millions of households. Margaret was 64, recently retired from teaching, and went in for a routine annual physical expecting nothing unusual. Her doctor called the following week with the kind of phrase that lands heavier than it sounds. Your fasting glucose is a little elevated. You're in the pre-diabetes range. Margaret did what most people do. She felt a flicker of fear, looked up a few articles, resolved to eat better, and went back to her normal week within a few days. Nothing dramatic changed. A year later, at her next physical, the number had not improved. It had crept up slightly. Her doctor began using a different tone this time, mentioning medication as a possibility for the future. That was the moment Margaret realized that eat better had never actually been a plan. It was just a feeling of intention that faded once life resumed its normal pace. We will come back to what changed for Margaret a little later because her story does not end there. Spice number 3. Ginger. Let's start counting down with the spice most people associate with an upset stomach. Ginger. Ginger's reputation as a digestive aid is well earned, but that is genuinely one of its smaller contributions when we are talking specifically about blood sugar. The more interesting story happens at the level of your skeletal muscle. Here is something most people never think about. Your muscles are one of the largest consumers of glucose anywhere in your body. Every time you move, your muscle cells are actively pulling glucose out of your bloodstream to use as fuel. This is part of why even a short walk after eating can meaningfully blunt a blood sugar spike. Your leg muscles are quite literally helping clear the glucose from your blood in real time. Certain naturally occurring compounds in ginger, including gingerols and shogal's, have been studied for their effect on how readily muscle cells take up glucose. The research suggests these compounds may help improve insulin sensitivity, specifically at the muscle cell level, which means your muscles can become more efficient at pulling glucose out of circulation, even independent of how much you exercise. When muscle tissue is doing a better job absorbing glucose, the downstream effects tend to look like smaller post-meal spikes, improved fasting numbers over time, and less strain on an already overworked pancreas. A clinical trial published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition followed people with type 2 diabetes who supplemented with ginger over a 12-week period. The findings showed a meaningful reduction in fasting blood glucose, along with improvement in longer-term blood sugar markers. That is not a trivial outcome from something as simple and inexpensive as a root vegetable from the produce aisle. Ginger also carries genuine anti-inflammatory properties. Remember that loop we talked about? Inflammation worsening insulin resistance and insulin resistance worsening inflammation? Ginger appears to interrupt that cycle from the inflammation side, containing compounds that dampen certain inflammatory signaling pathways in the body. So how should you actually use it? The simplest method is also the most effective. Ginger water, first thing in the morning, before you eat anything. Take a thick slice of fresh ginger root, or about a teaspoon of freshly grated ginger. Steep it in a cup of hot water for roughly 8 to 10 minutes and drink it on an empty stomach. Doing this in a fasted state means your body absorbs those active compounds without competing with a meal's worth of other digestion happening at the same time. You don't have to limit it to morning tea either. A small piece of fresh ginger blended into a smoothie disappears into the flavor while still delivering the benefit. It works just as well stirred into stir-fries, soups, or rice dishes. One mistake worth calling out directly: store-bought ginger products like ginger ale or candied ginger are not the same thing. They are usually loaded with added sugar and contain only a fraction of real ginger, which means the sugar content can actively work against the very outcome you're trying to achieve. You want real ginger, fresh or properly dried, without added sugar riding along with it. And consistency genuinely matters here. A single cup of ginger water and then nothing for a week will not move the needle. The research behind these effects comes from weeks and months of regular daily use. Think of it less like a remedy and more like a quiet daily habit your metabolism comes to depend on. I think about a man named Robert, 58, who spent decades driving long-haul routes for a logistics company. His schedule was irregular, his meals were often whatever was available at a truck stop, and his energy crashed hard most afternoons. The kind of crash that made him reach for another sugary drink just to get through the next few hours on the road. When Robert was told his fasting glucose was creeping toward the pre-diabetes range, the idea of overhauling his entire diet from the driver's seat of a truck felt close to impossible. But starting his morning with ginger water, something he could prepare the night before in a thermos, was a habit he could actually keep. Within a few weeks, Robert noticed something he hadn't expected. Those brutal early afternoon crashes were less intense. He wasn't reaching for sugary energy drinks with the same desperation. It was not a dramatic transformation overnight, but it was something real. And it was something he could feel. Spice number 2, turmeric, and the mistake almost everyone makes. Now we move one level deeper into the body's inflammatory machinery, with a spice many of you already have in your kitchen cabinet, turmeric. More specifically, the active compound inside turmeric responsible for most of its effects, curcumin. Turmeric has become something of a wellness buzzword over the last decade, and that popularity has, ironically, made it easy to misunderstand. A lot of people sprinkle it into their cooking without realizing there's a specific way to use it that determines whether it actually does anything for you at all. We'll get to that critical detail in a moment, because it changes everything. First, let's talk about what curcumin actually does. Curcumin belongs to a class of plant compounds called polyphenols, and researchers studying metabolic health have found it works on several fronts at once. The first front is inflammation. Curcumin has been shown to interfere with a signaling molecule in the body called NF-κB, which functions almost like a master switch for the inflammatory response. In people dealing with insulin resistance, this switch tends to be stuck in the on position far more often than it should be. Research suggests curcumin can help turn that switch down, and when inflammation eases, insulin receptors, those locks we discussed earlier, tend to respond better. Research published through the National Institutes of Health has examined curcumin's effect on insulin sensitivity directly, with participants who had insulin resistance showing meaningful improvement in how efficiently their bodies processed glucose after consistent curcumin use. The second front is the pancreas itself. The beta cells inside your pancreas are the ones responsible for producing insulin, and in someone progressing through prediabetes, those cells are under constant strain, pushed to produce more and more insulin to compensate for resistant cells elsewhere in the body. Curcumin appears to have a protective effect on these beta cells, helping to reduce the oxidative stress they're exposed to. This isn't just managing a symptom, it is supporting the organ at the very center of blood sugar regulation. The third front, often overlooked entirely, is fat tissue function. In insulin resistance, visceral fat cells, the fat stored deep around your abdominal organs, often become dysfunctional, releasing their own inflammatory signals that add fuel to that inflammation-insulin resistance loop. Curcumin has been studied for its ability to calm that inflammatory output from fat tissue, which helps interrupt the cycle from yet another angle. Now here is the mistake. On its own, curcumin is absorbed by your digestive system surprisingly poorly. Most of it passes through your body before it ever reaches your bloodstream in a meaningful amount, which means someone sprinkling turmeric on their food and expecting strong results may be disappointed for a reason that has nothing to do with the spice itself. The fix is remarkably simple. Black pepper. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine, and research, most famously a widely cited human study from the late 1990s, found that piperine can increase curcumin's bioavailability by an extraordinary margin, with some research suggesting an increase of up to roughly 2,000%. A small pinch of black pepper transforms turmeric from something that mostly passes through you into something your body can actually use. This is precisely why most clinical research showing strong curcumin results uses a formulation that includes piperine, or another method specifically designed to enhance absorption. Plain turmeric without that pairing is working at a fraction of its potential, so here's how to use it correctly. A half teaspoon of turmeric combined with a small pinch of black pepper is a reasonable daily target. Add it to soups, stews, curries, scrambled eggs, or rice dishes, and pairing it with a meal that includes some healthy fat helps even further, since curcumin is fat-soluble. Many people enjoy what's commonly called golden milk, warm milk, dairy, or plant-based, with turmeric, a pinch of black pepper, and sometimes a touch of cinnamon, enjoyed in the evening. If you prefer supplements, look specifically for ones that list piperine, or note a bioavailability enhancing technology on the label. Without that, you're likely getting far less benefit than the dose suggests. As with ginger, patience matters. Meaningful anti-inflammatory benefit tends to build over several weeks of consistent use, not several days. Helen, 67, came to this not primarily for her blood sugar, but for her joints. Years of low-grade inflammation had left her with stiffness most mornings that she'd simply accepted as getting older. When her doctor flagged borderline glucose numbers during a routine visit, Helen started looking more closely at inflammation generally, and that's how she landed on turmeric with black pepper as an evening ritual. What she didn't expect was that the same habit seemed to help on two fronts at once. Her joints felt more mobile in the mornings, and over several months, her glucose numbers nudged in the right direction too. Helen's experience is a good reminder that the body doesn't actually separate these systems the way we do in conversation. Inflammation touches joints and blood sugar at the same time because it's operating on the same underlying cellular environment. If this is genuinely helping you understand what's happening in your own body, a quick like on this video helps it reach someone else who might need to hear it too. Now let's get to the spice with the strongest direct evidence behind it. Spice number 1, Ceylon cinnamon. Here we are, at the spice most of you probably expected from the very start, cinnamon. And I understand the slightly skeptical reaction some of you might be having right now, because cinnamon has been talked about in wellness circles for years, often vaguely, without anyone really explaining the mechanism, the dosage, or, critically, which type of cinnamon actually matters. Let's fix that, starting with the research itself. Cinnamon has been studied specifically for its effects on blood sugar and insulin sensitivity, including work published in the Journal of Medicinal Food. Findings have varied across different studies and populations, but several trials have reported reductions in fasting blood glucose in the range of roughly 10 to nearly 30% among participants using cinnamon consistently, a range that, where it holds, would be clinically meaningful for someone in the pre-diabetes category. It's worth being honest that not every study has found effects this large, and individual results vary, which is exactly why cinnamon should be thought of as a supportive habit alongside medical care rather than a guaranteed fix. So what's actually happening biologically? There are several distinct mechanisms at play. First, certain compounds in cinnamon, including one called MHCP, appear to activate insulin receptors somewhat directly, essentially mimicking part of what insulin itself does. In effect, cinnamon may help unlock those cellular doors even when less insulin is circulating to do the job. Second, cinnamon appears to slow the rate at which carbohydrates are broken down into glucose during digestion by interfering with certain digestive enzymes. When carbohydrate digestion happens more gradually, glucose enters your bloodstream as a slower rise rather than a sharp spike, which gives your insulin response a much easier, more manageable job to do. Third, cinnamon appears to improve the responsiveness of insulin receptors themselves similar in spirit to what we discussed with turmeric, helping those cellular locks respond more readily when insulin does arrive. Fourth, cinnamon carries its own anti-inflammatory properties, continuing a theme you've probably noticed by now. The substances that help most with blood sugar tend to work, at least in part, by calming chronic inflammation. One frequently referenced study followed people with type 2 diabetes who took varying daily doses of cinnamon over 40 days. Groups taking cinnamon showed reductions in fasting glucose, along with improvements in cholesterol and triglyceride markers, both of which often run elevated alongside insulin resistance and add their own cardiovascular risk. Now, the detail that changes everything. Not all cinnamon is created equal, and this matters enormously for anyone planning to use it daily. The cinnamon sitting in most grocery store spice racks is cassia cinnamon, inexpensive, widely available, and what the overwhelming majority of households already have. The issue is that cassia cinnamon contains meaningfully higher levels of a naturally occurring compound called coumarin. In small, occasional amounts, this isn't a significant concern, but used daily, over months and years, as a deliberate health habit, elevated coumarin intake has been associated with added strain on the liver, which is a real consideration for sustained daily use. Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes labeled true cinnamon, grown primarily in Sri Lanka, contains dramatically lower coumarin levels, making it far better suited to everyday, ongoing use. Its flavor is a bit lighter and more delicate than cassia's sharper bite, and importantly, the active compounds responsible for the blood sugar-related benefits are present in Ceylon cinnamon as well. When shopping specifically for daily metabolic support, look for Ceylon cinnamon or true cinnamon on the label. It costs a little more, but for something you're using every single day, that difference is worth paying for. In terms of amount, research generally points to somewhere between a half teaspoon and 1 full teaspoon per day as a reasonable, well-tolerated range for most people. That's an amount you can fold into daily eating without it ever feeling like a chore, stirred into oatmeal or porridge, added to coffee or tea, mixed into yogurt, blended into a smoothie or protein shake, dusted over fruit, or worked into savory rice dishes and marinades. A lot of people try cinnamon, feel underwhelmed, and conclude it doesn't work, when in reality they were using cassia cinnamon in a small, inconsistent amount without any of the supporting habits we'll talk about shortly. Ceylon cinnamon, taken consistently in an adequate daily amount alongside basic lifestyle support, is a genuinely different experience. People who stick with it often describe steadier energy through the day, fewer dramatic afternoon slumps, less intense sugar cravings after meals, and an overall sense of metabolic evenness. These are personal reports rather than guaranteed outcomes, but they line up well with what the underlying biology would predict. Smaller, slower glucose rises and more efficient insulin use tend to translate into a steadier feeling day to day. Before we put all of this together into something usable, I want to talk about a pattern I see constantly, because understanding it might matter more than any spice we've discussed. Many people receiving a pre-diabetes result fall into what I'd call a passive waiting pattern. They feel a flash of concern for a few days. They make a vague intention to do better. And then ordinary life resumes. Habits stay exactly the same. And 6 months or a year later, the next blood test shows the number drifting slightly further in the wrong direction. The conversation with the doctor gets a little more serious. Medication starts being mentioned as a near-term possibility rather than a distant one. This trajectory is common, but it is not inevitable, and it is genuinely not the only path available. Prediabetes, in most cases, is reversible, particularly when it's addressed early, while the underlying damage is still limited. Cells that have become resistant to insulin can become responsive again. Chronic inflammation that's been driving that resistance can be brought down. A pancreas that's been overworked for years can recover meaningful function once the burden on it eases. None of this happens instantly, and none of it is guaranteed in every individual case. But the direction of change is genuinely available, starting from wherever someone is right now. What separates the people who reverse course from the people who progress toward type 2 diabetes is rarely genetics or bad luck. Far more often, it's sustained, ordinary, repeated action taken before the window narrows. Theory only matters if it turns into something you can actually do on a Tuesday morning when you're tired and running late. So let's make this concrete. Your morning starts before you eat anything, with ginger water. If you prepped grated ginger the night before, This takes about 30 seconds to start steeping and roughly 5 to 10 minutes to drink while you go through the rest of your morning routine. This is your fasted state dose, hitting your system before food competes for digestive attention. With your first meal of the day, whether that's an early breakfast or a later meal if you practice intermittent fasting, Ceylon cinnamon goes in. Oatmeal, yogurt, coffee, a smoothie, whatever your morning meal looks like, a half to full teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon becomes part of it. Somewhere later in the day, lunch, dinner, or as an evening golden milk, turmeric paired with its essential partner, black pepper, gets folded into a meal. A small pinch alongside a half teaspoon of turmeric, ideally with some healthy fat present, completes the trio. That's the entire core protocol. Morning ginger water, cinnamon with your first meal, turmeric and black pepper somewhere in your day. 3 habits built around food you're already eating, requiring no supplements, no special equipment, and very little added cost. Here's a challenge worth taking seriously. Commit to this for 30 days. If you have access to a home glucose monitor, check your fasting number once a week, same time of morning, and write it down. Track your energy. Track your cravings. Notice whether those afternoon crashes feel different. At the end of 30 days, you'll have something more valuable than any study: data from your own body about your own response. Many people who follow through on a routine like this notice meaningful shifts within the first 2 weeks. Steadier energy, fewer cravings, less heaviness after meals. The blood sugar numbers themselves sometimes move modestly within 30 days, and sometimes the bigger shift builds over several months. Either way, the direction is what matters. Whether a fasting number moves from 115 down to 108 or from 125 down to 118, that is real movement away from a threshold, not just a number on a page. These 3 spices do their best work inside a body that's also being supported in a few other basic ways. None of this requires perfection, just awareness. Hydration affects blood sugar more than most people realize. Even mild dehydration concentrates your blood, which means the glucose dissolved within it becomes proportionally higher, forcing your kidneys to work harder to manage it. Staying consistently hydrated, plain water, herbal tea, anything without added sugar, gives your body an easier baseline to work from. Sleep is deeply tied to insulin sensitivity. Research has shown that even a single night of poor sleep can measurably reduce insulin sensitivity the following day, and the effect compounds over weeks and months of chronic poor sleep. If improving blood sugar matters to you, treating 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep as a genuine metabolic intervention, not a luxury, changes the equation meaningfully. Movement after meals is one of the simplest tools available, and it doesn't require a gym membership. A 10 to 15-minute walk after a meal, especially dinner, engages your leg muscles, those large glucose consumers we talked about earlier, and can noticeably blunt a post-meal spike. A gentle walk around the block is enough. Stress management closes the loop. Chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated, and cortisol's job, evolutionarily, is to raise blood sugar so you have fuel available for an emergency. In modern life, that emergency is often just a stressful inbox, day after day, with no actual physical demand to burn off the glucose cortisol releases. Whatever genuinely lowers your stress, meditation, prayer, time outdoors, time with people you love, a hobby that absorbs your attention, has a measurable metabolic benefit, not just an emotional one. I want to take a moment on something that rarely gets airtime in conversations like this: how a prediabetes result actually feels to receive. There's often fear, especially for anyone who watched a parent or sibling go through type 2 diabetes and its complications. There's sometimes denial. I feel completely fine, this can't be that serious. There can be guilt, a sense of having done something wrong. And there's frequently overwhelm because suddenly you're being told to rethink food, movement, sleep, and stress all at once. Every one of those reactions is understandable. None of them are useful if they lead to paralysis instead of action. The only response that actually changes outcomes is informed, patient, consistent action, not panic, not an overnight overhaul, and not self-blame. Your body, in this moment, is not working against you. The insulin resistance you're dealing with began as a protective response, an attempt by your cells to shield themselves from what they perceived as overload. It became chronic, and it started causing collateral damage. but the underlying intention was protective, not destructive. A body given the right support, reduced inflammation, smoother glucose patterns, a more balanced metabolic environment, knows how to recalibrate. It has been doing exactly that, in countless smaller ways, your entire life. James was 71 and had been sprinkling regular grocery store cinnamon into his coffee for years, convinced he was already doing the cinnamon thing for his blood sugar. When he learned about the difference between cassia and Ceylon cinnamon, and that the amount he'd been using was a fraction of what research generally points to, he felt a flash of frustration at having missed something so simple for so long. He switched to Ceylon cinnamon, increased his amount to a full teaspoon with breakfast, and paired it with the same ginger and turmeric routine. Several months later, at a routine check-in, his doctor noted his numbers had moved in a meaningfully better direction. James didn't change anything dramatic about his diet otherwise. He simply started doing the same habit, correctly, consistently. If you're listening to all of this and thinking your situation has already moved past the point where any of it matters, maybe you've been told you have type 2 diabetes, maybe you've been managing elevated blood sugar for years, maybe past attempts didn't go anywhere. I want to push back on that thought, gently but clearly. It is almost never too late to influence your metabolic health in a positive direction. People with established type 2 diabetes improve their blood sugar control through dietary and lifestyle changes regularly, and in many cases, sustained improvement allows their doctors to reconsider medication dosing over time, always as a decision made together with their physician, based on their actual numbers. The mechanisms that respond to ginger, turmeric, and cinnamon don't switch off because of age or how long a condition has been present. Insulin sensitivity can improve at nearly any stage. Inflammation can be reduced at nearly any stage. Progress may move more slowly the longer a condition has been established, but the door rarely closes completely. And if you're earlier in this, a recent borderline result, a fresh prediabetes flag, your window right now is wide open, and early intervention tends to produce the most pronounced results, simply because there's less accumulated damage to work against. If that's you, the most useful time to start is now, not after the holidays, not once things calm down. Remember Margaret, the retired teacher whose numbers had drifted the wrong direction over a full year of vague intentions? After that second appointment, the one where medication started being mentioned, something shifted in how she approached it. Instead of another vague resolution, she built the actual 3-habit routine we just walked through, and she tracked it. 90 days later, her fasting glucose had moved down meaningfully, not because of one dramatic change, but because of the same small, unglamorous habit, repeated daily without skipping. Her doctor's tone in that follow-up appointment was noticeably different, encouraging rather than cautionary. Margaret's story isn't a guarantee for everyone, and individual results always vary. But it's a clear illustration of the actual variable that determines outcomes, not willpower in a single dramatic burst, but ordinary consistency, sustained over months. Let's bring this all together, because there's been a lot of ground covered. Prediabetes is driven primarily by insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is driven, in large part, by chronic low-grade inflammation and cellular dysfunction, not simply by eating too much sugar. That's why cutting sugar alone so often produces underwhelming results on its own. It addresses one piece of a larger puzzle while leaving the inflammatory root mostly untouched. The 3 spices we've walked through address that root from different angles. Ginger improves glucose uptake at the muscle level and helps calm inflammation. Turmeric, properly paired with black pepper, fights inflammation systemically, supports insulin sensitivity, and helps protect the pancreas itself. And Ceylon cinnamon, the one with the most direct blood sugar-specific research behind it, improves insulin receptor responsiveness, slows carbohydrate digestion, and has been associated with meaningful reductions in fasting blood sugar in multiple studies. None of these 3 spices replace medical care, and none of them should ever lead you to stop or adjust medication without your doctor's guidance. They are allies to your medical care, not substitutes for it. Most effective when your physician knows you're using them and can track your progress alongside you. Give yourself 30 days. Track what happens. Let your own body's response, not a study, not someone else's experience, but your own data, tell you whether this is working for you. Prediabetes is not a permanent identity. It's a signal, and now you understand exactly what that signal is pointing toward, and exactly what's within your control to do about it. Starting from wherever you are right now, with the information you now have, the only remaining step is simply to begin. I'm Dr. David Aid, and this channel exists to give you exactly this kind of clear, evidence-based, practical understanding of your health, without the jargon and without leaving out the parts that actually matter. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. I genuinely love seeing how far this reaches. If today's video gave you something useful, subscribe, because we cover topics like this regularly. Practical, evidence-informed approaches to metabolic health, longevity, and the natural systems your body already has in place for healing and balance. Every subscription and every comment helps this reach someone else who might be sitting with a confusing blood test result right now, wondering what to do next. If you're taking on the 30-day challenge, say so in the comments. Committing to it publicly tends to make it stick. And if you want to go deeper into building a comprehensive, sustainable approach to long-term metabolic health, there's a guide linked in the description that builds directly on everything we covered today. Your health was never going to be decided by a single diagnosis. It's shaped by what you do, consistently, starting today. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself. You're worth the effort.